Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Dominion Payroll webinar. Thanks for joining us today. We're so happy to have you for today's stimulus plan update. We've taken the last couple Tuesdays off, if you may or may not have noticed that, just to sort of catch up with our other jobs, but we are roaring back this Tuesday four deep because of the American Rescue Plan that is now law, and there are definitely some things that you guys need to know about that will affect you as we continue through 2021 and this sort of phase 100 of the pandemic, continuing to bat around terms like PPP, ERC, FFCRA, and all of our favorites. So we have about 20 slides today-ish. We'll spend the first part of the presentation talking about ARPA, the new legislation. Then Tracy will talk a little bit about the ERC and the impacts there, and then I'll round it out with some pretty big updates to the FFCRA paid leaves, which have been extended. And then, of course, we will take your questions. Anytime during the presentation, you can key those into the Q&A function on your screen, and we will answer those. Sometimes we answer them during the presentation. Sometimes we wait to the end. It's always a surprise, but we try to, if we see something that's timely to the topic at hand, we'll try to answer it in the moment. I know you guys are busy, so we'll try to do that for you. And if we can't answer it, we will do our best to find an answer. All right. So I think that's it for my intro. I'm going to throw things over to Kevin. Hi, Kevin.
Hey there, Leslie. How you doing?
It's nice to be back online with you.
I know. I who would have thought I missed this?
I know. I miss it, of course. I don't always miss prepping for it, but I do miss doing it.
Yeah. It's funny the way in a year we've become sort of these congressional reporters. We were sort of like half beat reporter, half legislative researcher.
Yeah, well, this bill reminds me a lot of the CARES Act, which to this day I have printed it out. I've accidentally printed it on one-sided paper almost a year ago, and so it's this thick stack, and I use it to prop up my laptop when I wanted it to be a little higher. And so this bill feels almost as big.
Yeah, well, it's only about $0.1 trillion less than. So
right.
So a few pages shorter, I suppose.
Exactly. And then on that note, we did the math and we realized that this Friday, the 19th, is the 1-year anniversary of this group doing these webinars because of the initial pandemic legislation. So
and we've only aged 10 years.
I'm so glad there's not a before and after photo. Anyway.
Well, how about we jump into it?
All right. What's going on?
All right. So what I'm going to do today, before I toss back to you, Leslie, and to Tracy, is just give everybody sort of a high-level look at some of the headline-grabbing stuff, the meat and potatoes of what is in ARPA, the American Rescue Plan. A lot of these things that I personally am going to go over aren't going to necessarily impact how you process payroll, how you pay taxes. But we just want everybody to sort of have a common language and understanding of what is in this bill. So the bill, it came out of the House of Representatives. It kicked over to the Senate, where there was some debate and some political posturing, and it eventually passed on partisan lines. And came out of the Senate. It was reconciled with the bill in the House, and it headed over to the White House, where President Biden signed it into law on the 11th, just a couple of days ago. And sort of the machinations of this bill sort of sprang into life almost right away. The big number that I'm sure everybody's familiar with, this is $1.9 trillion coronavirus rescue and economic stimulus bill. There is just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you're going to spend $1.9 trillion, there is going to be a lot in there. So a lot to unpack. But when we look back across some of the larger economic relief and spending bills, this is in the top 5 for sure. So let's get into what exactly is in the American Rescue Plan. Direct financial payments. This is the one that I believe it was 93% of folks in the American economy will get direct financial payments. It's $1,400 per person. It's paid directly to individuals that are making less than 75K annually, or 150K if you are married and filing jointly. Additionally, your qualified dependents are also going to receive $1,400. Um, and those payments went out as soon as this past weekend. Wells Fargo and Chase Bank were catching a little bit of heat because I think some technicality in terms of how the Treasury labeled these payments. They weren't set to clear until Wednesday. So some folks have been a little miffed that they see these like pending transactions. But a tremendous number of people will see this money before the end of the week. Having already gone through some of these direct payments, the $600 back in December, and I believe it was 14 or 1,200 back with the initial passage of the CARES Act. The IRS and Department of Treasury already had these things in place. Definitely some oddities in terms of we're in tax season right now, and so some folks, their financial situation may have changed. There's always going to be ins and outs when you're trying to push this much money out to a population of 330 plus million people. But it does seem that a lot of the people that are needing this money or qualify for this money, it's hitting their bank accounts this week. It does phase out for folks making more than 80,000 or 160,000 as a couple. So it phases out pretty quickly for folks above that threshold. All right, for folks out there that are still unemployed, sort of depending on how you calculate this, I mean, we're still looking at between 5 and 7 million Americans that are unemployed. That is down from almost touching 30 million at the worst part about a year ago, or a little less than a year ago, rather. So there's plenty of people that are hurting for sure in terms of jobless benefits. So this bill extends federal unemployment benefits of $300 a week through September 6th of 2021. So that gets us all the way through the summer, just past Labor Day. Initially, there was some partisan back and forth about whether this payment should be $400 for a shorter period of time, $300 for a longer period of time. This is what was settled on. This is a big news for anybody who received unemployment benefits. And, you may have folks that you've hired in the last couple of months who, for some portion of 2020, received unemployment benefits. If you're making less than $150,000, the first $10,200 is going to be tax-free of unemployment benefits. This is a change. This is a big one. If you've already filed taxes for 2020, you can file an amended return. So this is big news for anybody who received that money and didn't elect to have taxes withheld from it. There is a process that is going to be rolled out shortly to make sure that folks receive either the tax money that's been withheld returned to them, or the ability, when filing their 2020 taxes, to not count this as taxable income. Another big thing for folks, if anybody's familiar with COBRA, health insurance premiums you're entitled to have for, I believe it's up to 18. No, it's not. You know what? I'm not even going to venture a guess. I don't want to get it wrong. But folks are generally entitled to keep their health insurance through their employer for a period of time after leaving employment. The former employee has to pay 100% of that premium. It tends to be prohibitively expensive for individuals to stay on COBRA, but it's often preferable to being uninsured. This act provides a 100% subsidy of COBRA health insurance so that folks can stay on their employer healthcare plans through the end of September. So that is a big deal for folks, right here in the thick of everything, especially given the fact that there is a health crisis, ongoing in our country. So that's big news there. Okay, so a lot of economists have talked about this sort of glut of potential evictions and foreclosures that the federal government has acted sort of like the boy with the finger in the dike, to stop people who have fallen behind on rent or their mortgage payments. Um, you know, the fear is that, we get to an expiration date on these things, and then landlords and banks just, very quickly move into eviction and foreclosure mode. The last thing we want to see in the middle of, or beginning of the end, it depends on sort of your perspective looking out. The last thing that we really want during a pandemic are people being, kicked out of housing, moving into, crowded establishments, that sort of thing. Um, the moratorium on evictions and foreclosures will expire on March 31st as of right now. But this bill pumps a lot of money into assistance for folks that are behind on mortgages, rent, and utility bills. You can see the numbers down there. I draw a little attention to those dates. You can see that emergency rental assistance is extended through September of 2027. Emergency housing vouchers is extended all the way through September of 2030. A lot of money in there to help folks experiencing homelessness, and a sizable chunk of change for tribal housing and rural housing. So, really just trying to make sure that people are keeping a roof over their head and the lights turned on in the midst of both a health crisis and an economic one.
Kevin, if we could pause for just a second and go back to COBRA, we have a question.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Okay, Vicky asked, does COBRA have to be related to COVID or for any reason of unemployment?
My understanding is that it's any reason of unemployment. I would have to double check on that. I don't want, certainly don't want to give you bad information, but on my, I didn't spend a ton of time digging in on that, and I certainly can. But my understanding right off the cuff is that it is for any reason of unemployment through September of this year.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's skip ahead. All right, as the father of two kids, this one caught my eye. So, as it stands right now, if we go back before the Trump era tax cuts, I believe the child tax credit sat at $1,000. In 2017, it was increased to $2,000 per child, and this further expands the child tax credit. This is a fully refundable tax credit for people who have kids claimed as dependents. It increases to $3,000 a year for each child that is dependent on you between the ages of 6 and 17, and it's up to $3,600 for children under the age of 6. This is for couples who make less than $150K per year, or a single parent who makes under $112,500. The idea here, and this is sort of the novel thing to pay attention to, rather than this just being an above the line tax deduction that's fully refundable when you pay your taxes in, say, April, rather than getting a chunk of change that would come to you once a year around tax time, families can expect to get direct payments of $300 a child and $250 a child, depending on those age brackets. We think that that's probably going to start in around July. So, I mean, just personally, my wife and I, we can expect to have $500 a month come to us for our two boys. If, depending on sort of the timeline of when the IRS is able to roll this out, it may not be July, but it should be in the summer. And the tax credit does remain fully refundable. So if you don't get, no one is likely to get the full $3,000 or $3,600 per kid here in 2021, and so whatever remains will be refundable on your taxes that you pay in April of 2022. So that is a big one, and I mean the headline that I think a lot of people have been repeating is that economists look at this and say this is likely to cut childhood poverty in this country in half, which is a pretty tremendous thing. It's a bit of an odd thing. It's certainly not It's not the normal way that American social safety nets have been developed. And the thing that is just interesting is that it's not qualified on work or certain conditions. It's just simply having a child being dependent on you. There's already some moves in Congress to make this permanent. Senator Mitt Romney from Utah has proposed an increase to the number. So that's some legislation that we'll be paying attention to. And, obviously if that comes to be, we'll report on it here. Student loan forgiveness. This was something that, made some headlines, and Joe Biden certainly campaigned on the idea. Of forgiving up to $10,000. There's pressure from within his own party to forgive up to $40,000. Legal experts are weighing the constitutionality of how much Joe Biden can forgive in terms of an executive order rather than using Congress. Joe Biden is hesitant to, with just the stroke of his pen, get rid of loan forgiveness, and so no forgiveness occurred in this act. But there is a provision that says that if Congress or through an executive order, if student loan forgiveness does occur between now and January 1 of 2026, that forgiveness won't act as income. So it will be a tax-free forgiveness should it occur. So, all right, huge focus of the pandemic and sort of getting our economy restarted is getting kids back in schools. So a tremendous amount of money, next to the direct payments to individuals, it's a ton of money that is going to K through 12 schools, $130 billion going out to the states. And this is for PPE. It's to improve ventilation, hire teachers, reduce class sizes, all the things that go into doing the sort of infrastructure and logistic changes that need to get kids back into a school building. And this will work in concert with what I'll show you in a slide or two, some vaccine distribution, testing, coronavirus testing, and contact tracing. These things will work together, but a lot of money around this. Colleges and universities will see about $40 billion, and that is, acknowledging the fact that folks that are undergraduate, graduate program have been hit pretty hard in terms of financial aid, and so this is to sort of shore that up. Big chunk of change going to the Child Care and Development Block Grant Program, $40 billion there, and $1 billion to help the pre-K Head Start program. So a lot of money going out to shore up education. As a working parent, I know that we certainly appreciate what our teachers do, but we also have to acknowledge that in so many ways, it's a huge part of the childcare puzzle in this country. And, this money is aimed towards trying to take some of the pressure off of that and make it as safe and practical as possible to get back to the next normal.
Kevin, can I interrupt you again?
Of course.
Sorry, but we have another question, and I have an update to the COBRA question.
Oh, awesome.
So this question, I missed it earlier because I was researching the COBRA question, but Anonymous asks, is the child's tax credit based on 2019 or 2020 taxes?
So if you have not filed 2020 taxes and they get the program off the ground, but prior to April 15th, then they will base it on 2019. It's unlikely that they will, and so it'll be based on 99% certain it'll be based on 2020 taxes. If for some reason you haven't filed or you filed for an extension, it'll go off of 2019 numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so I researched the other question, Vicky's question about does the COBRA extension in ARPA, does that have to be related to COVID or for any reason for unemployment? And so you'll recall what we said earlier is that COBRA is now extended through September. And it looks like qualifying individuals must have lost their job involuntarily. So that could be COVID related due to downsizing or layoffs or closure of business, or it could be some other reason, but you can't just it looks like to me, if I'm reading this correctly, it's only from involuntary separation from your job, not for someone who quits or gets fired for cause. So that's the latest there, Vicki, and I'll continue to dig into that as we go forward. But otherwise, you could involuntarily lose your job not related to COVID, and it sounds like you would still be eligible for this COBRA extension.
Thanks for that, Leslie. That rhymes with my understanding as well.
Cool.
All right, let's see. Let's get back to. All right, so this is certainly pertinent to our audience. There's a new $25 billion that is being set aside for a program specifically aimed at assisting restaurants and bars. The limitations on this will be $10 million per company, so organized under an EIN. It's a limit of $5 million per location. And there is a limit of 20 physical locations in this program. The funds can be used for just about anything you need to run your business: payroll, rent, utilities, inventory, things like that. So that program, is just being stood up now. We're going to pay close attention to that, particularly for all of our restaurant, bar, club, nightlife, cafe, all my favorite places. We'll have more information on that as this program sort of comes into focus. So our old friend, the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, an additional, $7.25 billion, should say in funding rather than in finding. I don't know, when you got a $1.9 trillion bill, maybe they found it in the couch cushions, but no, that should be funding. The application deadline for the PPP program right now remains the end of this month. So anybody out there that has not done a first draw, if that person exists, but certainly if you haven't done your second draw, we encourage you to take a look at that, make sure it's right for your business, but get that application in before the end of the month. The little asterisk there just refers to the fact that there is bipartisan support to extend this deadline to the end of May. So we may get some, we may get a little bit longer of a runway on PPP, and there's also the idea of funding the SBA for an additional 30 days to process any applications that come in through the very end of May. But that has not transpired yet. So keep your eyes here. We will update you if there is any legislation that moves the goalposts on PPP, that program.
Mike says that Virginia, he says, FYI, Virginia is taxing the PPP money.
I saw that in some coverage of the recent the short session in the General Assembly, and it's frustrating to say the least.
And then Anonymous asks, can you apply for round 2 of PPP if you are still spending round 1?
Tracy may know the answer to that. I'm not sure.
You have to have spent the money.
Okay.
And kind of be in the process of forgiveness. Most of the banks are at that point. So if you're still spending round 1, most people are not spending round 1 because all the cover periods would be done by this time. They would be done. I mean, you had to stop 12/31/2020. So you might be in the forgiveness process. And if you are in the forgiveness process, you can apply for round 2. And you should hurry because it was going to end the 31st of March. I think there was some talk about extending that, but it didn't get passed, I don't think.
It hasn't been extended as of this morning. So
yeah, but there was a talk about it going through May, but I just haven't seen anything that it's happening. So you have basically 15 days.
Yep. And Anonymous, if you've got questions that are sort of specific to your situation, shoot us a note at questions@Dominion Payroll. We'll see if we can't clarify based on your unique position right now. Just a couple more slides to wrap up the meat and potatoes of the American Rescue Plan. as folks are starting to get the vaccine, and it is feeling, maybe it's just the warmth in the air these days, but it does feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But there's still thousands of people getting sick every day. We're still at elevated levels, and it's cause for real concern. And so this bill does include $50 billion for testing, contact tracing, about 19 billion going in to increase the size of the public health workforce, and then 16 billion to help with the actual distribution of the vaccine and shore up those supply chains. So many of these vaccines need to be kept in specific cold conditions, and this is the money that I mentioned will work sort of in concert with the big infrastructure moves around education and childcare. So, schools are able to reopen safely, and then also, just making sure that these places where students and teachers are going to congregate have the resources to, get tested, do contact tracing, just make sure that everybody's as safe as possible as we do move into what I keep referring to as the next normal. Lastly here, you may recall as we discussed various attempts at stimulus in the fourth quarter of last year, a really big sticking point between Republicans and Democrats. Democrats wanted money to help states, municipalities, and territories, shore up their lost revenue. Republicans were really reticent to do that. It was an ideological difference between the two. The federal government, according to the U.S. Constitution, is not required to have a balanced budget, but states are. And so a lot of states are in the unwelcome, or, they're in the territory of having to cut key services, whether that's police and firefighters or libraries and arts programs. I mean, states are just having to look across this. And so this bill does provide $350 billion, huge chunk of change. I think it's the third largest part of this bill going out to help replace that lost tax revenue. And then just real quick, a lot of headlines were made about the minimum wage increasing over the next 4 to 5 years to $15 an hour. There seemed to be quite a bit of momentum when Joe Biden was inaugurated. That evaporated. The progressive side of the Democratic Party wasn't able to rally enough to get that included, and the parliamentarian of the Senate actually said that $15 minimum wage couldn't be included in this bill by nature of the way that it was being passed. There were some efforts to include an amendment. It eventually failed. The Progressive Caucus in the Democratic Party have vowed to make this a key issue. So this is not the last time we've heard of the $15 an hour minimum wage, but it is not included in this bill. So that is, in a quick 26-minute nutshell, the American Rescue Plan. I am going to turn the microphone over to, let's see, Employee Retention Credit, and I believe that is you, Tracy. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
It sure is.
Do you want to answer the couple questions that are in there?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sorry, I was making an ERC joke at Tracy's expense, but too soon. It's too raw. Yeah, we do have a couple questions. If Kevin, you want to take a drink of water while I read them, and we can try to answer them.
I think I need a drink of coffee.
Or coffee, whatever beverage you have is getting you through. All right, before we dive into ERC, Anonymous says, our accounting firm stated that this round of stimulus would be an advance on 2021 taxes. Do you have any comments on that? Sorry if I missed it.
Let's see. I do not believe, I'm not sure I understand the question, whether this is direct payments to individuals or PPP programs, or what stimulus money Anonymous is referring to here. But most of this money, the direct payments to individuals, no, that is not an advance on 2021 taxes. This is tax-free money. This is not taxable income. It will not count against you or for you, or however you want to phrase that. when you file taxes in 2021. This is money that goes into your bank account. You spend it as you see fit, and you move on with your day. I would double check with your accounting firm on that, but with a huge degree of certainty, this is just money that is going to individuals, plain and simple, and they will not have to pay taxes on it.
All right. And then Claudia asks, what are qualified dependents in 2021? 18-year-old students were not included in 2020. So again, this is for the stimulus check, I would imagine.
Yes. I need to double check on this because the definition of qualified dependents was expanded so that if you did have, say, an elderly parent that qualified as a dependent, they would count. And my understanding is that up until the age of 23, qualifying students who depend on you for income would count. And that I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. I'm 75% certain on that, but let me do a little research and I'll try and get that to 100%.
Okay, you ready for me to do employee retention credit?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So would you flip to the next slide? Thank you so much. All right. The biggest news is that the ERC has been extended and expanded again. It was set to end at the end of second quarter. And on the 11th of March, Biden extended it to go all the way to 12/31/2021. So it'll cover all 4 quarters. They are leaving it with the same amount of wages per quarter that are eligible. That's $10,000 per quarter per employee. And you get 70% of those wages. So a max credit of $7,000 per employee per quarter. So you could get up to $28,000 for the year. The way you qualify for it is still the same. So gross receipts are less than 80% of gross receipts for the same quarter in 2019. You can use the current quarter or the quarter directly preceding for comparison. So what you want to look for is look at you're going to always be comparing to 2019. So you're going to look at, for this quarter, you're going to look at fourth quarter of 2020 as compared to fourth quarter of 2019, or you can look at first quarter of 2021 as compared to first quarter of 2019 to decide if you were eligible for this quarter. The other caveat is you could be closed. So if you had a business that was fully or partially suspended and they don't make any percentage on that. So if you're, partially suspended, maybe you can only have 90% of people in your establishment, you're still considered to be partially suspended by a governmental order. And that right now, a lot of people that would qualify under this would be like gyms and restaurants and other businesses like that, theaters, things where they have to have a reduced capacity. So they qualify without the gross receipts part. So it's not that you have to have both of these, you just can have one or the other to qualify for the employee retention credit. And it's a huge credit. So that is also, it's available for businesses that were not in existence in 2019. So you can use your 2020 for those purposes of the credit. Again, that's 70% of the qualified wages plus your health benefits. So whatever your pre-tax health benefits that your employees are provided, you can also apply those to the credit. And the max is $7,000. So if you have an employee, that gets 10,000 in a quarter, then you're going to get the full 7,000. If you don't, then it's just going to be 70% of whatever wages you paid them. The large employer threshold is 500. It used to be 100 in 2020. It was 100. Now it's 500. And that full-time employee doesn't have anything to do with FTEs. So I'm going to talk about what is considered a full-time employee. So you can think about how you might apply that when you're looking. Also, the 2020 retroactive ERC that became available to PPP recipients, the government said that you have up to 5 years to apply for that. So you have a long time to decide if you actually are eligible for the 2020 retroactive. All right. Thank you. These were just some FAQs, but how does an eligible employer identify the average number of full-time employees employed during 2019? So this is a big question that I get asked a whole lot. So I thought I'd put this out here. The term full-time employee means an employee who, with respect to any calendar month in 2019, had an average of at least 130 hours of service. Whoa, okay, of service per week, or 130 hours of service in the month. All right, that's determined in accordance with section 4980H of the Internal Revenue Code. So what you want to do is you want to see how many full-time employees you had. So part-time employees do not count. You don't take like, oh, I have 2 part-time employees and together they work 30 hours, so they would be like 0.5 make a 1. No, it doesn't work that way. It's just the number of people who actually work 130 hours in the month or 30 hours per week that you're concerned about. All the wages do count. So when you're applying the ERC, it would apply to all wages, not just those full-time employees, but to all wages. Are tax exempt employers eligible for the employee retention credit? Yes. Organizations described in section 501C and exempt from tax under the section 501A of the code may be eligible employers for the purpose of the employee retention credit if they are employers that otherwise meet the requirements to be eligible. Qualifying health expenses not only include your major medical coverage, but dental and vision coverage and any other benefit to which COBRA continuation rules would apply. So that's kind of it in a nutshell of the big questions that come out about ERC. And that's all I have.
All right, Tracy, there is a ERC related question, if you don't mind. Rose says, are life insurance, short-term disability, long-term disability, etc., qualified expenses for ERTC?
I don't think so. Usually what I include when I'm doing it is medical, health, and vision.
Okay, and then Anonymous says, can you repeat the rules for the gross receipts going back just 1 quarter?
Okay, so if you're looking for Q1 to see if you're eligible for Q1 of 2021, you can look at 4th quarter of 2020 as compared to 4th quarter of 2019. And if you had a decline of 20% or more, you have to be lower than 80% in order to qualify. If you qualified, usually what they look at, like, if you think about this, if you qualified for PPP round 2, you probably qualify for ERC. That's because they also ask for gross receipts, a decline in gross receipts. So if you're looking for quarter 2, you're going to look at quarter 1 of 2021, or you can wait till the end of quarter 2 and see how that one pans out.
Okay. And then Mike said a little bit earlier, will that apply to the states as well? Virginia not only taxes PPP, but also any grants received. So I guess
I think Mike is referring to that the tax exempt status of individual stimulus. And I honestly, I'm no expert on how states are required to account for or pay taxes to the federal government in terms of money that comes to them in terms of direct stimulus. So short answer is I don't know the answer to that, Mike, but I would suspect that given the unique relationship between the states and territories to the federal government, that that's not going to be, quote unquote, taxable income to the states.
And Anonymous has sent in a link. Thank you, Anonymous, to a news story, but I have not clicked through it yet, so I'm not sure what's in there, but I will definitely read it, or maybe one of my colleagues can while I'm prattling on about the FFCRA.
Hey, Leslie, if you don't mind, I'm going to just jump in real quick and give a clarifying answer to the dependence question for
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
individual stimulus. So the law is very expansive. According to the IRS, dependents are children 17 and younger who rely on you for their income. Age 17 to 23, if they're students, they qualify as a dependent if they make less than $4,300 a year and are dependent on you for at least half of their income. So any kid that's making under 4,300 and relies on you in terms of food, room and board, that sort of thing, they will qualify as a dependent, and you'll be able to get a stimulus payment for that. And then also anyone who is elderly or infirm, according to the IRS, that relies on your care and generally lives in your house will also qualify as a dependent under this. And so that's $1,400 a head for all of those qualifying features.
All right. All right, so moving into the FFCRA, the ARPA definitely made some changes. We're going to go through those. And I'll just preface this by saying that the DOL has not updated its FAQ page yet on this. So this is really just sort of what we know now based on the text of the bill and the various pundits speculating about what it actually means. We don't have a lot of answers in terms of, we might not be able to answer some of your questions today because we just don't know, and we haven't heard much else from the actual agency that provides the guidance. So of course we will keep you updated. And then you too can also go, if you Google FFCRA, DOL, FAQs, you'll get the same page that we look at to check on their updates. All right, so you might recall a year ago, the FFCRA was passed and it provided what we call ESIC or EPSL leave and EFMLA leave to employees of private sector businesses with fewer than 500 employees. In late December, that was the mandatory piece of it expired. So in 2020, employees were entitled to these leaves. You had to give it to them by law. In the first quarter of 2021, it has been optional. All of the other terms are the same, but it's been up to you whether or not you actually would like to pay for these COVID-related leaves and collect these fully refundable tax credits, which in my mind is kind of a no-brainer. If you're going, the whole point is to keep somebody who's sick or might be sick out of the office. And then if you don't have to pay for their sick leave, then that's a win-win for everybody. But I realize that that's not always something that somebody can, that makes sense for people given their unique situation. But right now, what this law is saying is that as of April 1st, through September 30th of this year, you continue to have the option to collect fully refundable tax credits for people who qualify, who need to be out of the office. And this doesn't count for people who are able to work from home. This is for people who truly cannot work because of the qualifying reasons that we'll go through in a second. And they did add some qualifying reasons, so I will go through those in a little bit on the next slide. So even though it's optional, you need to be consistent. And actually in the law itself this time, it states that employers that discriminate will be denied credit. So if you cherry pick who on your team gets these paid leaves and who doesn't, based on whatever factors you have, whether they're highly compensated, medium, low, whether they're in your department or someone else's, whether you like them or not, you should not discriminate. If you're going to adopt a policy that you're going to grant these leaves, then you need to grant it to anybody who qualifies. If they somehow get wind of the fact that you are discriminating, then you'll be not denied any credits and potentially could be subject to additional fines, penalties, or lawsuits. The other big thing is that when the leaves were expanded as optional discretionary leaves into 2021, anyone who had exhausted the bank of hours that they had in 2020 could not have taken any more days in 2021. Well, now what they've done is they've reset that bank. So if you'll recall, ESIC or EPSL, emergency paid sick leave, is that 2 weeks of leave that generally is used for to get people through a COVID scare. It has some other qualifying reasons as well, but generally it is an emergency provision to keep people away from other people while they either recover from COVID or work through a scare or await a test. Full-time employees as of April 1st now get 10 days, again, regardless of whether they've used it or not previously. For part-time folks, that you would do an average of what they would work over the course of 2 business weeks for your business. So you could do like a 6-month look back, and if they have variable hours, you could do a look back period of 6 months and average out, say they typically work 25 hours a week, then that would be what they'd be entitled to for ESIC or EPSL. They don't have to take it all at once. Typically people do if they're sick, because that is the window of time. 2 weeks is the window of time that the CDC recommends people wait it out. But we have had cases where people have only taken a couple days because they were awaiting a test and they got a negative test back, and so they only had to take half of those days or something like that. And then they're entitled to the remainder of those days if they need them again through September 30th of this year. Now, EFMLA, sorry, that's a typo, it's EFMLA, is also reset. So if you recall, in 2020, employees who needed to take time off because they had a child at home because of the school or daycare was closed due to COVID, they had 10 weeks. Well, they had 12 weeks, but the first 2 weeks were without pay. So really they had 10 weeks to take. And then now that's resets as of April 1st. So now people have these additional 10 weeks to take for qualifying reasons that we'll get into in a second. This leave is paid at 2/3 the rate of regular pay, with a maximum now of $12,000 total per employee for whatever period they take off, up to 10 weeks. Excuse me. So if you have some highly compensated employees who take this time off, they might, well, everybody will be paid less than their normal rate because it's at 2/3 rate, but there might be some folks who really will reduce their pay. But that said, at least it's better than nothing. And the government is going to refund you for it. So you're not even paying for this leave. So yeah, so that max has gone up from 10,000 to 12,000 per employee, which is good news for everybody. And again, it resets to 10 weeks. So if we go to the next slide, we'll get into how and why your employees would qualify. So the big major change, as I understand it, is not only does these banks of time reset, but now you can use EFMLA for the same set of reasons that you could use EPSL. In 2020, or actually up until March 31st, you could only use EFMLA for childcare reason. So number 5. Now you can use EFMLA for any of these reasons. Now, the original 10-week time period was geared towards, helping parents through a gap in childcare. Now they're saying you can take up to 10 weeks. So you have the first 2 weeks of EPSL, and then you have 10 weeks after that. So 12 weeks of leave in whatever combination you need to for these reasons. So that's a big change. And I'm really curious to see what the DOL says about this. I'm sure there are staffers scrambling to come up with answers to questions that have already been asked of them. So this is big. So now, and the other thing is that they've added some reasons. So you'll see in number 3, they didn't specifically say in the first act that you could take this leave because you were awaiting the results of a COVID test. Now they are saying that. And a lot of people did take it for that reason. And I think it's, in hindsight, just fine. But then 3C there, you can now take this leave if you need to go take time off to obtain the vaccination or are recovering from any injury, disability, illness, or condition related to the vaccination. So that obviously is new. So if someone needs to take some time off to get vaccinated and they're not feeling well the next day, you can have them stay home and the government will pay for those wages. So I just wanted to list those here because this is a big change. It This leave doesn't have to be taken all at once. It can be taken intermittently. That usually happens for the childcare, when someone's taking it for the childcare reason, because if you're sick, you don't really want to take intermittent leave. You want to stay home the entire time. But if you have a child whose school is closed or is in a hybrid situation, I know that they're all doing different things right now, then you could maybe take off Mondays and Wednesdays as EFMLA, get paid 2/3 your regular rate of pay, and then work Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays as normal. You can even do it, slice and dice it down to the hour. If you know that your child needs you in the mornings, but you made arrangements for the afternoons, you could take EFMLA in the mornings from 9 to 12 and then come back to your regular rate of pay from 12 to 5 or whatever your working hours are. We would just need, in terms of the payroll tracking, we would need, if we haven't already done this for you, you would need to ask us to set up separate earnings codes for FFCRA leave so that we can track them and make sure you get that tax credit in real time when payroll is run. So if we go to the next slide, and this is the last slide, we're just going to review how the tax credits work. Again, this all kicks in April 1st and ends September 31st. They're essentially the same as under the original FFCRA, which went into effect April 1st, 2020, except for the increased aggregate cap for the EFMLA, which I said now is up to $12,000 per employee. Tax credits are available as described below, regardless of how much EPSL or EFMLA an employee used prior to April 1st. So whatever happens up until March 31st at midnight, it doesn't matter. As soon as April 1st starts, everybody's entitled. If everybody who works for somebody who's fewer than 500 employees could qualify if you as an employer would like to participate. So the credit available for emergency paid sick leave when used for reasons 1, 2, or 3 on the previous slide is 100% of the regular rate of pay, with a limit of $511 per day, and that's the same as before. For reasons 4 or 5 on the previous slide, it's 2/3 of an employee's regular rate of pay, with a limit of $200 per day. So I think that's interesting. So reasons 1, 2, and 3, that third reason is that self-care reason, which is awaiting a COVID test, getting the vaccine, or recovering from the vaccine, and that they're eligible to be paid at 100%. The second two reasons, the last two reasons, 4 and 5, are, 5 is the childcare reason, and 4, I believe, is caring for somebody else. And in that case, it would be up to 2/3 of your regular rate of pay. Again, government would be paying that, so you wouldn't have to spend that money. And then the EFMLA is always 2/3. That's not changing, but the limit per day is 200, but the total cap is $12,000 per employee, and that is up from 10. And here at the bottom, employers can also claim a credit for their share of Medicare tax on the employee's wages and the cost of maintaining the employee's health insurance or qualified health plan expenses during their FFCRA absence. So you can also get that reimbursed for those as well in the form of real-time tax credits. So big news, we're still in this. People might still need to be out. I think it'd be great to go ahead and have a conversation with your leadership team about whether or not you're going to grant these policies or not, or take advantage of this option. I haven't seen any newly issued labor law posters or model notices, as it were, from the DOL just yet. So as of now, my goal is to post on the COVID resources page on our website an updated request form that includes the new qualifying reasons, as well as some communication to your staff if you decide to participate in this sort of newly available FFCRA extension, which again, you don't have to, but I do think you should have a conversation with your leadership and decide right now if you can, whether or not you're going to honor it. Because like I said, in the law itself, it says that you cannot discriminate you can't pick and choose between employees. If you're going to offer it for one, you have to offer it for everybody. So you might as well just go ahead and prepare for what your response will be. You could be proactive and send out an email to your employees and say, this is what we're doing. Here's the mechanism for you to request leave. Here are the qualifying reasons. So I hope to get that language up on our site this week. That way you can go ahead and prep for the April 1st changeover. All right. Looks like we have a couple questions. Vicki says, do you know if we can put a guideline on the sick leave, such as the employee must be employed at least 30 days? That's a good question, Vicki. It's the sick leave. So in the original bill, the emergency paid sick leave, or e-sick, or those first 2 weeks that had all the qualifying reasons, there was no waiting period. I could have been hired yesterday, come down with COVID today, and I'm entitled for up to 80 hours of sick leave that would be paid for by the government. EFMLA, which in 2020, in the before times, was just for childcare, you had to be employed for 30 days. And that 30 days didn't have to be consecutive. It could be before and after a furlough. I don't know that I've seen a change in that. And anyone else who has, please pipe in. I'll have to do a little bit more research. Vicki, you're asking really good questions today.
Hey, I'm going to look that up because
Yeah.
I feel like I ran across something like that.
Yeah.
So let me just do a little bit of research.
All right. Thank you. Teamwork. All right. So hold tight, Vicki, on that. Anonymous says, does the employee have to use their leave provided by the company, paid leave first, prior to using EPSL or EFMLA time? Oh, that's a really great question. So again, in the original bill, it's stated that you as the employer could not allow them or force them to use their PTO that they have earned on your clock before taking this time. I still would, so now that it's discretionary, and I'll do some more research on this, but I would think that you would be safer and you would protect yourself if you would go ahead and let them use this government paid leave before they tap into their PTO. Again, a lot of this is new. There's not a lot of precedent, and we're expecting 2021 to be an interesting year in terms of case law that comes out of all sorts of sort of year 2 of COVID things, and this might be one of them. But if I were you, I would, if you're going to offer this, I would let them use this up first before they get into their PTO, because that's a benefit that you have awarded them. And, typically, in pre-COVID times, PTO wasn't used for this. I mean, or what would have been used for this, but this is a whole different era. So I hope that answers your question. If I find out more, I'll float it, put it out there on the next webinar. All right, looks like we have some activity in the chat. Oh, right. So I forgot to mention earlier that we will have a copy of this presentation, both the slides and the audio, on our website on the COVID page by the close of business today. So if you missed something or need to have this for the record, it will be up at some point. All right, while Tracy is diligently.
I haven't seen anything yet.
Okay. All right, well, I'm going to do a quick plug for tomorrow's webinar then. Tomorrow is our every other week edition of HR Matters. And tomorrow we are returning to the topic of the vaccine. So those of you who have been avid listeners know that we've covered this before, but it's still an important topic as things change by the day around the vaccine. And since I did the last webinar on the vaccine about a month ago, or maybe longer now, there's been a whole new Johnson & Johnson vaccine that's come out, and a lot more clarity around how to get the vaccine if you would like it. And also some questions answered around what your policy should or should not be or say in your workplace. So we will cover, Tracy's going to jump on with me tomorrow, and we'll have a conversation about what we know to date about the vaccine, how it's playing out. As always, we would love to hear of course, your questions, but also your anecdotes. What's happening in your workplace? What are you hearing from your employees? What are you doing that feels good or is still feeling a little weird? How are you tracking if you have a policy in place and people are beginning to get the vaccine? Are you tracking that, and how? So please bring those anecdotes and share them with us so that we can hear what's happening out there in the real world, and we'll share with you the best of our information around the vaccine. And that's tomorrow at 11 o'clock. And if you have any additional questions, now's the time to key them in. If not, it is 12 o'clock, so we will also encourage you to send something to questions@dominionpayroll.com and we can answer it that way. Looks like, Vicki, we don't know yet about the 30-day waiting period.
Still looking.
I'm gonna assume that it's the same then, which is there's no waiting period for those 2 weeks of e-sick, but there is a waiting period for EFMLA, but can't say that 100%. Obviously, if somebody is sick, we don't care about how long they've been employed. They just need to stay home. And so what they're saying here is that at least for those 2 weeks, you're covered. And then I guess if there is a 30-day waiting period in place for EFMLA, they could use, well, I guess if they had just started, they wouldn't have any PTO to use. So you'd have to kind of work out that 2-week interim to get them to that 30 days, if that makes sense. So yeah, and if you have more questions or a specific situation, Vicki, just send me an email at questions@dominionpayroll.com and we'll get those answered. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. Tracy and I will see you tomorrow on our HR Matters webinar. And otherwise, have a great week.
Yeah, have a good one.
Take care, y'all.
Bye.